Before we start this week's sermon, a little editorials correction from last week. My apologies go out to Arnold Schwarzenegger's family, to the Von Trapp family, and to all Austrians. Arnold was born in Austria. So, point still stands, he could not be elected president unless we changed the Constitution. So, we talked about a changing of God's law last week that enabled Christ to fulfill the role of high priest, not according to the law of Moses, but according to the order of this guy named Melchizedek. And so, if you missed that, I don't know if it's up online yet, but you can go back and watch that one of these days soon. Today, we're going to talk not about the reason why Jesus was able to be high priest, but we're going to talk about the difference between the tabernacle that Moses built and a tabernacle that was not built with human hands. Chapter 8 in Hebrews starts off, the author says, hey, our high priest has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of majesty in the heavens. And he is a minister in the sanctuary and in the true tabernacle. And in our translations it says that the Lord pitched. In the Hebrew it says the true tabernacle that Yahweh pitched. So, in the book of Exodus, we read about God telling Moses that he wants him to build a place, a tent, so that God could dwell in the midst of the people of Israel. That was the whole reason that God took them out of Egypt, was because since Adam and Eve had been kicked out of the garden, God no longer lived with his creation, with his people. And he wanted to live with them. And so he said, I'm going to rescue you. I'm going to deliver you from slavery, and I'm going to take you to this land. And I'm going to go with you, and I'm going to dwell with you. So Moses went up on the mountain and spent a little bit too long there, 40 days. That's another sermon for Aaron and the bull. But while he was up there, God showed him a model. God showed him, you're going to build a tent, a tabernacle like this one. So when I was in architecture school, back in the day, before computers, when we were designing something, to fully understand what we were designing, because you're sketching on a two-dimensional piece of paper, but you're thinking about this three-dimensional thing, one of the things that helped us was that we would build a model. Now, sometimes when you're just doing some down and dirty stuff, and you get the X-Acto knife out at 2 in the morning and try not to cut your finger off, you build out of cardboard, and you just kind of, hot glue and cardboard and stick it all, I think that's going to work. That's not the model that you're going to present to the professors. If you're going to present something to professors, you're going to get the basswood out, and you're going to cut it with saws, and you're going to sand it, and when it's done, this belongs in a museum, right? This is beautiful. Nowadays, they do that with computers. And so they can build a space like this in electrons. And on the computer screen, you can look at it and say, "Ooh, wow, this is cool." And now you can put those funny little glasses on and actually walk around in it. Is that the real thing? Is the architect done? He's going to walk away and say, "Enjoy the model. Have fun." No. The point is, you're going to build a building. There's going to be a place that you can go into, whether it's an enclosed building or whether it's an outdoor room. You're going to build something. Well, this is kind of backwards from that. Because God is telling Moses, you're going to build something as a model so that the people can see what I'm going to do in the future. But you're going to build a model of this place that already exists, this place that I've already built. The Holy of Holies in the heavenlies. It's a copy. The tent that Moses built, that Israel carried around with them for forever until until David's son Solomon built the temple in Jerusalem. This tabernacle was a shadow. It was a shadow of what actually existed in the heavenly places. And so what the priests then would do, now, okay, let's see if I can walk you through this. The tabernacle, it's a big rectangular space like this, open to the sky, most of it, and there's this place called the outer court that people could stand and watch. And in that outer court, near online when you enter the gates, there's an altar. And the altar was where the priests would sacrifice the animals. And in front of the altar was a huge basin for water, for cleansing, for ritual washings. And then there was an enclosed tent. And inside of that tent, there were two rooms. The holy place, and in the holy place, on one side you had a table that had showbread on it, and on another side you had a lampstand, a golden lampstand that provided light. And then there was an incense altar. And the incense altar was right before another veil. And you go into that other veil and you're in the Holy of Holies. And inside the Holy of Holies is the Ark of the Covenant. And the lid of the Ark of the Covenant had two angels on it, solid gold. And their arms, their wings were stretched out over the lid. And God told Moses, that's where I'm going to meet you. That's where I'm going to meet you. Once a year, not just the ordinary priests that are serving in the outer court, not just the priests that come into the holy place, but once a year, the high priest is going to go into that Holy of Holies behind that veil. But before he goes in there, he's got to wash. He's got to wash himself. He's got to put the right clothes on. And he's got to wear little jingly bells on his robe just in case he dies in there and the jingle stops, you'll know to pull him out, because you can't go in there to get him. And he's going to go in there first with the offering from a bull. Now the priest will sacrifice the bull, and he'll take the blood from that bull, and he's going to go into the Holy of Holies, and he's going to offer that for his own sins and for his own family's sins. And when that's done, then he comes back out, and there's two goats and a ram. And they'll cast lots for the goats, and one of those goats is the lucky goat. He's the scapegoat. And that's where we got that term from, okay? The high priest, is going to put his hands on the scapegoat and pronounce all of the sins of the nation of Israel for the past year that were committed out of ignorance. And then someone's going to take that goat out into the wilderness, and the goat's going to run away. And he's going to take those sins with him. And then the other goat is sacrificed. and the ram is sacrificed. And the priest is going to take that blood back into the Holy of Holies, and he's going to sprinkle it out on the mercy seat. And that is for the atonement of the sins of the nation of Israel for the past year that they have committed in ignorance. Every year. Every year the high priest had to do this. And he had to start by offering a sacrifice for his own sins. In the section of chapter 9 before our reading today, the author of the book of Hebrews says, you know, that stuff was good for the outer stuff. It's good for the body, because it talks about food and it talks about washing. But you know what it didn't do? It didn't do anything for the conscience. It didn't cleanse the conscience of the people. Because it was just the blood of a bull, a ram, a couple of goats. That's why it's so important that Jesus was able to be a high priest. First of all, because when he came back from the dead, death no longer had power over him. He lives forever, lives now, through eternity. So we don't ever have to go back and get a new high priest like the Israelites did. He's never going to retire. He's always going to be there. But the author of the book of Hebrews says, here's the key. Here is the key. Jesus, being our high priest, he didn't go into a tent that Moses built. He didn't go into a room that Solomon built or that Herod built. And he didn't take with him the blood of goats. When he was on that cross, he entered into the Holy of Holies in the heavenly places. He entered the very throne room of God. And he took his blood and he sprinkled it on the mercy seat. That was an acceptable sacrifice. We know that it was an acceptable sacrifice because he came back from the dead. And because he's ascended into heaven. If God had not accepted his sacrifice, that wouldn't have happened. But he offered his blood, the one who lives forever, offered his blood for us. And it didn't just cover up our sins. It took them away. Took them away. Stay with me here. Not just the sins you committed this morning or yesterday or last week, but the sins that you're going to commit tomorrow and next year. That's already been covered with the blood of the Lamb. It's gone. That is powerful enough to cleanse the conscience. And this is possible because God has instituted, through what Jesus did, he has instituted a new covenant Not the covenant that Moses and the Israelites made with God at the foot of Mount Sinai, but a new covenant. And Jeremiah talked about that new covenant. Listen to the words of Jeremiah chapter 31. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. Not like the covenant which I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. My covenant, by the way, which they broke, although I was a husband to them. But this new covenant, which I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord, I will put my law within them, and on their heart I will write it. And I will be their God, and they will be my people. At the end of verse 34, he says, I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. So the author of the book of Hebrews says that it's not like the blood of goats, the blood of Christ. It's different. It does cleanse the conscience. It cleanses it from dead works being the works of the priests, continually offering sacrifices. It cleanses the conscience from dead works so that we can now worship God. Worship and serve, same word in Greek and in Hebrew. And when it talks about service, serving the living God, the one who could not stay dead, the one who gave us life, that's the same word for worship. And one of the ways that you could translate that is servitude, in service or in servitude, like an indentured servant. And what is the service? What is the worship that we can give, that we give to God? If we've been cleansed, if our conscience has been cleansed, so that we can serve the living God, what is that service? Jesus said, believe in me. If you believe in me, you believe in the one that sent me. And then he said, a new commandment I give you. Now Moses had that long list, right? You had the 10 Commandments and all the rest of them. Jesus gave us one commandment. We have one commandment now. We talk about the 10 Commandments because they teach us some really important things about how we live in order to fulfill that new one commandment. There's a different covenant that's been made now. And that new covenant has one new commandment. Love one another. How? Love one another just exactly the way I've loved you. Oh, and by the way, I'm dying for you tomorrow. It's that simple. It's that simple. That's all we have to do. Love one another the way Christ loved us. Maybe it's not so simple. But we've got a high priest that has cleansed us from all unrighteousness. We've got a high priest that has cleansed our conscience. We now have an advocate in the throne room of God who is saying, he's mine, she's mine, she belongs to me, I died for her. He's wearing my clothes, my righteousness. We can walk into that room now. We don't have to be afraid to go behind the veil. We can walk into that room and say, Daddy. And then we have the privilege of interceding for people who can't go in there yet. Love one another as I've loved you. That's the new covenant. And our high priest has made that covenant for us. In a temple that was not built by hands. I don't know, I got goosebumps about that. You guys ought to have goosebumps about that. So as we go before the Lord in prayer today, think about it that way. We're standing at the mercy seat. When we say the prayer of the church, we're in the presence of Almighty God. Why are we there? Because the sins have not just been covered, they have been taken away because of our high priest. So let's stand and go before the Lord in prayer.